I'm surprised nobody said New York, because his family left New Jersey when he was about 7. They moved to New York, and that's where his political career in later years will take root. And he'll be known as a New York statesman, even though he was born in New Jersey. And by the way, if you're ever in northern New Jersey, not far from New York City, there's a little town where he was born called Caldwell. You been there? Have you been to the museum? The very home in which he was born in the 1830s is still standing. It's a Cleveland museum. And you can go in there and see a lot of things that go back to the 1830s and 40s, and memorabilia from his White House years, including his presidential bathrobe. And they have it draped over the bed, and that gives you a sense for, wow, he was one monster of a man. Wrap that robe around him. So, born in the 1830s in Caldwell, New Jersey, and late in his teens, he decides he's going to go off to this town in Ohio named for a famous ancestor, Moses Cleveland, not named for Grover, but named for Moses Cleveland, to find out, what's in this place that carries my last name. But on his way, he decides to go to Buffalo, New York, to visit an uncle. And that's as far as he got. His uncle convinced him to stay in Buffalo. He helped him through law school. He earns his law degree and starts practicing law. He gets elected sheriff of Erie County for a single, I believe, 2-year term in the 1870s, and then goes back into law practice for the balance of the decade. But he earns such a reputation for honesty and forthrightness and integrity that in 1880 the citizens of Buffalo prevail upon him to run for mayor. City Hall in Buffalo was a corrupt den full of politicians who were using public money to reward their political cronies. And Cleveland went into that office and almost immediately became known as the veto mayor. He vetoed one ordinance after another. He really did his darndest to clean up City Hall. On one single contract that he nixed, he saved the citizens of Buffalo $200,000 on a $420,000 contract, almost half, because he discovered, like was the case so often, the council was padding it and taking some kickbacks and giving it to the political cronies. He stopped that. And in short order, this reputation of being honest and mindful of the taxpayer really caught hold around the state of New York. In 1882, the Democratic Party is looking for somebody to be their candidate for governor. And this young mayor of Buffalo, New York, seems to be a promising opportunity. And so the party officials go to Grover Cleveland and say, you need to run for governor. We're going to run you whether you want it or not. And he said, all right, and ran and won very handily. And I'll tell you more about his time as governor in just a moment, but think that this is only 2 years before he's elected president. So he goes, in 1880, he was nothing but a former one-term sheriff of Erie County, New York, and a successful local lawyer, relatively young, in his 40s. He goes from that to mayor of Buffalo, then governor of the state, and then president of the United States in just 4 years. It's quite a meteoric rise in American political history. Well, as governor, after the 1882 election, he becomes known as the veto governor, vetoing one extravagant bill after another, one corrupt measure after another. One of my favorite Cleveland vetoes as governor is of a bill called the 5-cent fare bill. It was put forth by, among other people, a young New York assemblyman by the name of Teddy Roosevelt, who was in the Republican Party at the time. And this bill put a price ceiling. It was a kind of price control on what the private owners of the elevated railways in New York City could charge for a fare. 5 cents, no more than 5 cents. And it was a very populist measure. A lot of these guys went for it, telling the people, look, we're saving you money. We're thinking of you. We're going to prevent these greedy, profit-hungry capitalists from ripping you off. 5 cents is the most they'll be able to charge. Governor Cleveland vetoed it. And as was his custom, both as governor and as mayor, and later as president, he used the opportunity to educate about what the proper role of government was. And in his veto of the 5-cent fare bill, he said, this is private property. This is not our property. It's not the state's elevated railway. These are private owners, private contracts. We have no business. This is not our function. And we should not be traveling down this path. And he was right. And to his credit, Teddy Roosevelt later recanted and said that Governor Cleveland was right on that, even though he was for it when it first passed. Cleveland, as governor, also set a standard when it came to political appointees that he would later keep as president. There was always a lot of pressure for a governor or a president in those days to pick our guys for all these thousands of positions, more than 100,000 at the federal level in the civil service. Pick, our guys because that's what this is all about. We're elected now, so we throw out the other guys and put our guys in. Cleveland angered his own party by time and again either reappointing a Republican who he thought was doing a good job, or removing a Democrat that he thought was lousy and replacing him with someone else, Republican or Democrat, who he thought was more qualified and more capable. He did that so often that he endured endless wrath from his own party. They thought, well, you're supposed to be a Democrat, but you just pick whoever you think ought to be there instead of good Democrats. And he felt very strongly that public office is a public trust. If you've ever heard that phrase, public office is a public trust, that's Grover Cleveland's. And he felt that you pick the best you can find, not who happened to have the right letter after their name. And he did that time and again as governor. Now along comes 1884, and the Democrats haven't been in the White House since James Buchanan left in March of 1861. And they're really thirsty for a strong candidate. And this guy from New York, he's overwhelmingly popular, clean as a hound's tooth. They want to run him for president. And again, he says, okay. And late entry into the race, basically at the convention. And after, I think, the third ballot, Cleveland is nominated for the presidency in August, I believe it was, of 1884. The next few months proved to be one of the dirtiest political campaigns in American history. Not because of the two leading candidates and what they said or personally did, but rather what underlings did on their own initiative, it seems. But the nastiness from the two sides was really at a fever pitch in this campaign. Anyone know who his Republican opponent was? Right, James G. Blaine. From your history books, you might recall that little jingle that Blaine, the Continental Liar from the state of Maine. That people didn't like him, would say that over and over again. But Cleveland faced a tough issue in that campaign too. It was in September, less than 2 months before the election, when a newspaper back in Buffalo reported that there was a woman in Buffalo claiming that her child was really Grover Cleveland's, who was single and had been governor and mayor. And some aides come to Cleveland and say, what's this story? Is there anything to it? These are Victorian times in America, so it could be a potentially huge scandal here if there's any truth to it. It turns out the woman, by the name of Maria Halpin, had several male friends who were very close. And Grover, it turns out, never really believed he was the father. Francis himself, the son, told me that, but he never said so publicly. He happened to be the only one of several suspects who wasn't married. And it could have been, but I don't want to necessarily cast aspersions on Maria, but it may have been that she thought, well, he's, now that I'm pregnant, I'll finger him. I don't know. That's the predominant school of thought suggests that that's the way it unfolded. But Grover, to his credit, never said, no, it's not me. He stepped up to the plate, and though he didn't marry Maria, he did provide generous support for